She was already sitting on step 11 when the door above her opened. Not for long. She had moved the moment the meeting ended, past the elevator bank without slowing, past 2 colleagues who said her name and received only a nod, past the precise threshold where performance was still possible. The emergency stairwell between the 12th and 11th floors smelled like concrete and recycled air. There was no one there. That was the only qualification that mattered. She sat, palms flat on the cold surface, back straight, not from composure, but from the muscle memory of holding herself correctly in front of people who were always watching. She had been in that meeting for 53 minutes. She had spoken for 4. The rest of the time, she had sat with composed posture and calibrated expression while Park Min-woo presented, in Korean, unhurried and confident, the exact strategic framework she had spent 6 weeks building. Belonging over reach. Trust over visibility. Tone as infrastructure rather than decoration. Different vocabulary, the same architecture she'd drawn from scratch. The room had leaned forward. One of the external directors had taken notes. The last thing I need is to become the emotional foreigner. She pressed her palms harder against the step and breathed the wrong way. Not the controlled professional exhale she'd maintained for the last hour, but the kind that sounds like something is being held back by will alone. The door above opened. Footsteps. Measured. Unhurried. The specific pace of someone not surprised to be taking the stairs. They stopped 2 steps above her. She didn't look up. Not cleaning staff. They used the service stairwell. Not a director. Stairs were beneath them. That left a narrow window, and the silence that followed suggested the person above her had no intention of filling it unnecessarily. She kept her eyes on the floor. He stood on his step. Neither spoke for close to a full minute. In a building full of people who always had something to say, that silence was the most honest thing that had happened to her all day. If you've ever had to sit still while something was taken from you in front of an entire room, you already know this feeling. This story is going to go somewhere real. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and drop a comment if you've ever been in a room that seemed built for everyone except you. Latifah Johnson had arrived in Seoul with 2 suitcases, a carry-on, and a printed copy of her contract, because she had learned, long before this, that paper meant something in rooms where your word alone didn't. The position at KW Tech Solutions had been, by any objective measure, significant. Brand strategy and international communications for a mid-large tech company in the critical window of expansion into American markets. They needed someone who understood the target audiences from the inside, not from a demographics report. Latifah understood that. She was that. The offer had been generous, the title clean, the project real. The warning signs she'd noticed during the process. The slight pause before confirming her role, the vague language about cultural alignment, the way the word diversity had appeared twice in the same sentence that also used the word initiative. She had rationalized them the way you rationalize things when you want something badly enough. They hired you. They chose this. That means something. Her first week was orientation, process briefings, team introductions, an office tour that ended at a coffee machine she would later learn nobody actually used. She navigated the business card protocol carefully, received each card with both hands, read it before placing it on the table, never pocketed one without attention. She had researched the etiquette weeks before arriving. She had not wanted to be the American who didn't bother to learn. She had never been that person anywhere. Park Min-woo had introduced himself on the 3rd day with a smile that arrived at the right speed and a sentence she would replay more than she'd like. If you need anything, navigating the team, the language, anything, I'm here. It had seemed genuine. The smile reached his eyes just enough to be plausible. He was 33, 3 years into the company, and he had the ease of someone who had learned to move through corporate space without friction. He asked her in their second conversation how feedback worked at her previous company. How direct, how formal. He listened with the attentiveness of someone genuinely curious. She answered. He nodded and typed something on his phone. It had looked like interest. She filed it without a label. Yoon Seo-jin, their direct superior, operated with a precision Latifa respected immediately. Not warm, not cold, but exact. Clear briefs. Acknowledgement of good work in one sentence. Meetings that ran on time and ended with decisions. She was 38 and had been at the company for 12 years. And something in the way she held the room suggested she had survived things that weren't mentioned and had drawn her own conclusions from them. Latifa had thought, after the first 2 weeks, that she could build something here. She had started on the brand strategy immediately, working from the research she'd commissioned before even signing the contract. The concept was straightforward in the way most true things are. The problem wasn't visibility. African American and Latino audiences had been marketed to by every major brand in every possible way for decades. They could identify a campaign built on reach from a distance. What actually created loyalty was specificity, the language of belonging, of being spoken to rather than at. It required someone who understood the nuances not just as data, but as lived context. Latifa understood them. She had also understood from the first week that the knowledge she carried was not uniformly legible in this room. Not because the strategy was weak, it was rigorous, grounded in 80 pages of qualitative data and 3 years of adjacent campaign work she'd done in the United States. But the people evaluating it did not have native access to the cultural context that made it meaningful, and some of them, she suspected, were not fully aware of that gap. They evaluated it the way you evaluate something foreign when you don't know enough to evaluate it correctly, with the instinct to simplify, to sand down the edges until it fit a framework they already trusted. She had anticipated this. She had built her slides to bridge it. She had rebuilt them 3 times following feedback from the week prior, adjusted the language, reorganized the information flow, changed the shade of blue in the charts, because someone had mentioned in passing that the previous shade looked too aggressive for their style. She had made the change without comment. The presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. She arrived at 1:30 p.m., 12 people in the room, directors, team leads, 2 external guests from a partner consultancy. Seo-jin on the left, expression neutral. Min-woo in the corner, phone in hand, typing. And in the back, a man she didn't immediately recognize. Dark gray suit, notebook open, pen resting still against the page as if waiting. Latifa stood at the front and began. The first 3 minutes were good. The room shifted into that particular quality of silence that signals genuine processing. People receiving something they hadn't anticipated. She felt it, the way you feel it when a room decides to listen. The strategy was sound. She knew it was sound. Then, at minute 5, one of the external directors said something in Korean she only partially caught. Seo-jin replied briefly. There was a pause. Latifa si. Seo-jin's voice was measured. Perhaps it would be better to continue after aligning some internal points first. She did not finish the slide. She sat down with composed grace, opened her laptop as if noting something, and listened to Min-woo step into the space she had vacated. In Korean, unhurried. Same conceptual structure, belonging versus reach, tone versus volume, trust as tactic versus trust as foundation. The room leaned in. One director wrote something down. In the back of the room, the man with the notebook had stopped writing the exact moment Min-woo began speaking. Latifa noticed this. She didn't know why. She filed it away. When the meeting ended, she waited for the room to empty. Thanked Seo-jin with a steady voice. Took her laptop. Walked to the emergency stairs because the elevator meant more faces and more performance, and she had nothing left for that. She had been in step 11 for approximately 4 minutes when the door above opened, and everything that followed began. The footsteps stopped. Latifa waited for the next sound, a phone call, a message alert, the creak of the door reopening. Something that would explain the pause, give it a context that didn't involve someone standing 2 steps above her in deliberate stillness. Nothing came. She looked up. He was a Korean man, early 30s, with straight dark hair slightly disheveled in the way of someone who runs a hand through it when thinking. He wore a dark gray suit without a tie, collar slightly open. He had a notebook in his left hand, still open, pen clipped inside the cover. And he was looking at her with an expression that didn't try to do anything. Not comfort, not professional concern, not the polite neutrality of someone who had walked in on something private and was trying to back out gracefully. He was just looking, the way you look at something you've already decided to stay with. She recognized him from the meeting. The back row. The pen that had gone still. She had a moment, sitting there, where she measured what it would cost her for this person to see her like this. On a step, jacket still on, posture still correct from habit, in a stairwell that smelled like recycled air. The instinct to perform recovery was immediate and familiar. To stand up, say something light, make the scene something other than what it was. She had performed recovery in 43 countries, in 7 corporate environments, in meetings where her name had been mispronounced 4 consecutive times by the same person, and she had smiled and corrected it and moved on. She was too tired for it today. "I'm not crying," she said. "I know," he said. It wasn't reassurance. It was an observation, delivered at the same flat register as everything else about him, as if the sentence had no more weight than describing the weather. She almost preferred the lie. "You were in the meeting," she said. "Yes. You're PMO." She remembered now. She'd read the org chart in her first week. Kang Dong-hyun, Project Operations Manager. "Yes." He sat down on the step 2 above her, which put them at approximately the same eye level given the incline. He didn't ask permission. He didn't make a production of the gesture. He simply sat, opened his notebook to a blank page, and clicked the pen once, as if he might write something, and then chose not to. They sat in silence again. It was different from the silence before she'd looked up. That one had been an absence. This one had weight. The kind that accumulates when 2 people are both aware that something happened and have, separately, decided not to perform a reaction to it. "It was my strategy," she said finally. Not to him exactly. To the air. But he was the only one there to receive it. "I know," he said again. She turned to look at him properly. He was watching the wall across from them, not her. Notebook still open, pen still uncapped. "Then why didn't you say anything in the room?" The question came out more direct than she'd intended. She watched him absorb it, the way water absorbs something dropped into it. Not without effect, but without drama. "I noticed," he said. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "that was wrong." Not, "I should have." 2 words that were the most precise answer available, and were somehow worse and better than any longer version would have been. She sat with them. "That's not the same as doing something about it," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." Neither of them spoke for a moment after that. A door opened on a floor above and closed again. Footsteps passed and faded. "You take the stairs often?" she asked. "When I need to think." She almost laughed. Not from humor, from the recognition of it. She pressed her palms against the concrete and stood, straightening her jacket with 2 precise movements. "I should go back up." He nodded, not standing. "The pen," he said, glancing at her jacket pocket. She looked down. The cap was still off. She had been holding it uncapped since before the meeting ended. A habit she didn't always notice. She capped it without comment. "Kang Dong-hyun," he said. "I know," she said. "I read the org chart." She opened the stairwell door and went back up without looking back. She didn't need to. She already knew he was still sitting on that step, notebook open to a blank page, in a building where everyone was very good at looking at things and very practiced at not saying what they saw. She called Imani that night. She said, "There was a guy at work. He sat on the stairs and didn't ask me anything." There was a pause on the line. Imani said, "Huh, that's rare." The observation hung in the air between Atlanta and Seoul, with more weight than either of them chose to examine yet. The next 2 weeks passed in the particular way that time passes when you're managing the distance between what you know and what you can prove. Latifa went back to her desk. She rewrote nothing. She did not rework the strategy a fourth time, did not soften any language, did not request a follow-up meeting to revisit what had happened in that room. She did the work she was assigned, delivered it on time, and kept her expression in the register of engaged professional. She was very good at this. She had been good at it for years, and it had served her well until now, which was information she was still deciding what to do with. Min-woo remained exactly as he had been. Available, easy, helpful in the specific way of someone who knows where the structural gaps are and positions himself across them. He sent her a message 2 days after the presentation. The directors really engaged with the brand direction yesterday. Good energy in the room. She read it and set the phone down. Dong-hyun she saw in the expected places. Hallway crossings, team check-ins, the shared kitchen on the 11th floor, where someone had taped a handwritten note to the microwave that read, in Korean and English, "Please do not heat fish." She and Dong-hyun had passed each other in that kitchen twice, before he said anything beyond a nod of acknowledgement. The second time, he poured coffee into his cup, looked at the handwritten note, and said, "Someone heats fish every Thursday." The note has been there for 4 months. "Has it worked?" she asked. "No." She almost smiled. Why do they keep the note up? He considered this. Perhaps because removing it would mean admitting it didn't work. She took her own coffee and went back to her desk with the distinct sense that he'd been talking about more than the note. He didn't seek her out. He didn't create opportunities to talk. What he did was something harder to name. A consistent, quiet presence in the peripheral space of her workday that didn't press against her boundaries, but also didn't retreat from them. She noticed this because she was, by training and necessity, a person who noticed things. She cataloged it alongside the other things she had noticed. The way Min-woo always had his phone at meetings. The way Seo-jin's glasses came off when someone lower in the hierarchy was speaking. The way certain ideas traveled across the team and arrived somewhere else wearing different names. During a Thursday afternoon alignment meeting, Min-woo asked Latifa to walk him through her methodology for the audience segmentation. She did, concisely. He listened with visible interest, asking clarifying questions. At one point he said, "And how did you arrive at that insight specifically? Was it the qualitative data or something more instinctive?" She explained the research process. He thanked her and typed something into his phone. Later, she replayed the moment and heard the first conversation differently. How feedback works at your previous company. How direct, how formal. She understood then what she had filed without a label. It hadn't been curiosity. It had been research. She called Imani that night. This call was different from the last, tighter, less air in it. "He asked me to walk him through my methodology," Latifa said. "Again. And you did?" Silence. Latifa. "It's my job to collaborate," she said. "I'm supposed to be building bridges between the team and the American market perspective. If I don't share, I look like I'm hoarding information. If I do share, I'm..." She stopped. "Feeding the machine," Imani said. "I can't prove anything." "I know you can't." Imani's voice was steady. Not gentle exactly, but solid. The voice of someone who has loved you long enough to skip the softening. "But you don't not know it either." The line was quiet for a moment. Imani shifted on her couch. Latifa could hear it. Then Imani said, "Do you remember what you told me the week before you left?" "What?" "You said, 'I just need them to see me work. The rest will resolve itself.'" A beat. "I almost said something then." "Why didn't you?" "Because you were already on the plane, basically. And because, look, I know you. When you've made a decision, the conversation you need isn't, 'Are you sure?' It's, 'What do you need to navigate this?' So I gave you that instead." Latifa absorbed this. It sat differently now than it would have 3 months ago, before she'd learned what the company's architecture actually was. before she'd sat on step 11 with her palms on concrete. "What's the observation worth?" Imani asked, circling back. "Stairs guy." "I don't know yet," Latifa said honestly. "But it's not nothing." It was the most she'd allowed herself to say. She said goodnight and sat in her apartment with the Seoul skyline through the window and the specific stillness of someone who has named a problem and not yet decided what naming it obliges her to do. There is a specific vocabulary that corporate environments develop for the management of inconvenient realities. Latifa had a dictionary of it by now. "We'll revisit this" meant, "This has been decided and is not being revisited." "Let's align on priorities" meant, "Your priority is not a priority." "The timing isn't ideal" meant, "There is no ideal timing for what you're proposing." And "Let's consider it," delivered with the correct neutral smile and a slight forward tilt of the head, meant, with near mathematical precision, "No." She catalogued these over the course of week 4 and 5, in the same way she catalogued everything, with careful attention and no visible reaction. The second meeting of consequence happened on a Tuesday. A smaller room, 6 people, no external consultants. Seo Jin had asked Latifa to present her revised approach to the launch messaging for the American expansion, specifically the copy framework she had drafted, the one that adjusted the brand's tone from functional authority to aspirational familiarity. It was good work. She knew it was good work. She presented for 8 minutes. No interruptions. The room was quiet in the way the first meeting had been quiet at the start. The quality of silence that follows something unexpected. Seo Jin asked 2 precise substantive questions. Latifa answered both. Then Seo Jin said, "Let's consider it alongside the alternatives we're developing internally." There were no alternatives being developed internally. Latifa knew this because she was the person responsible for the framework and had been told there were no parallel efforts. She said, "Understood. I can revise if there are specific concerns. No revisions needed at this stage. Let's just give it space. Give it space." She added that to the dictionary. She looked at Dong-hyun across the table. He was writing something in his notebook. He did not look up, but she caught the exact moment his pen slowed, then stopped, then continued at a different pace. Like a pause that wasn't a pause. Like someone registering something in a different column. After the meeting, in the corridor, he fell into step beside her for approximately 30 seconds before turning toward his own section of the floor. "The copy framework," he said, without looking at her. "The one you presented." "Yes." "Was it the second or third draft?" She looked at him. "Third." He nodded, almost to himself, and turned left. She stood for a moment after he'd gone, working through the weight of that question. Second or third draft. He had been tracking the version history, not as an action, just as a fact he was carrying. She walked back to her desk with the distinct sense that something was accumulating, somewhere, that she didn't have full visibility into yet. It wasn't comfort, exactly, but it was different from the specific aloneness of the previous weeks. 2 days later, she opened a shared project file to update a section, and found her name listed as a contributor rather than the author in the document metadata. The lead author field listed Minwoo's name. The document was a strategy brief she had written entirely, submitted under her own folder 2 weeks prior. She checked the version history. It had been modified once, 5 days ago, by a user with admin permissions. The change was a single field. Her name removed, his name placed. No record of any revision to the content itself, because the content hadn't been touched. Only the attribution had been updated, which meant whoever made the change had done it precisely, deliberately, and without any pretense that it was a mistake. She sat with that for a moment. The screen was quiet. The office around her had the ambient sound of a Thursday afternoon. Keyboards, a conversation somewhere down the hall, the elevator opening and closing. None of it changed because of what she was looking at. The building kept running. The structure kept holding. And inside the structure, a single field in a document metadata panel told her, with administrative precision, that the rules of the game had been clear to someone else from the start. She did not escalate the issue that day. She saved a screenshot. She took the stairs home. Seoul was 9 hours ahead of Atlanta. When Latifah called at 3 a.m. her time, it was 6 p.m. the day before in Imani's apartment, which meant Imani was on the couch in her oversized hoodie, probably watching something, probably with the volume low enough to hear the notification. She picked up before the second ring. "Hey," Imani said. Not surprised, not alarmed. The voice of someone who always picks up. "I found a document with his name where mine should be," Latifah said. No preamble. A beat. "Whose name?" "Minwoo. The strategy brief I submitted in week 3. The full audience segmentation with the copy framework. Author field. His name." Silence on Imani's end. The kind that means she's deciding between several things she could say. Latifah heard the sound of headphones being put on, the small crinkle of over-ear pads, which meant Imani had put the TV on mute and was giving this her full attention. "That's not a mistake," Imani said. "I know." "What are you going to do?" Latifah had been sitting on her apartment floor since midnight, back against the bed frame, phone on her knee, turning the question over. "I don't know," she said. "If I go to Seojin, I'm the one making it difficult. If I go to HR, I'm the emotional foreigner who doesn't understand team culture. If I say nothing. If you say nothing, it happens again." "Yes. And if it happens again after that, and after that, you've established a precedent that says this is acceptable and you won't fight back." Latifah closed her eyes. "I'm also here on a corporate visa, Imani. If this becomes a formal dispute and the company decides the atmosphere is—" "I know," Imani said quietly. "I know." They sat in that together for a moment. The weight of it, the specific geometry of the trap. You could not fight without risking the structure that kept you legally in the country. You could not leave without confirming every assumption the people who dismissed you had made. You could not stay silent without the silence beginning to shape what was possible. "There's the PMO," Latifah said. "Dong Hyun. Stairs guy who noticed. He asked me which draft the copy framework was. Not in passing, with a specific intent. Like he was confirming something he already knew." She paused. "He's been writing things down." "What kind of things?" "I don't know yet." Imani's voice, when it came, was the careful version, the one she used when she had an opinion she knew the other person wasn't ready to want. "You know what you actually need to figure out?" Latifah waited. "Whether you want to fight this because it's the right thing to do, or because you're afraid that if you don't, you'll spend the rest of your career wondering what you let become normal." A pause. "Those lead to different decisions." Latifah was quiet long enough that Imani added, "I'm not saying don't fight. I'm saying know which fight you're actually in." It was 3:47 a.m. when they said goodnight. Latifah sat on the floor for another 20 minutes, then got up, made tea, and stood at the window watching the city that didn't owe her anything and had not pretended otherwise. She went to work the next morning with the screenshot still on her phone and the copy framework document open in a second tab she never minimized. She asked him in the kitchen. Not dramatically. She had not planned it as a moment. She had simply reached her own internal threshold with circling, and when she found him there on a Tuesday morning, pouring coffee with the notebook already in his jacket pocket, she said, "What's in the notebook?" He looked at her. Not surprised, not guarded. He set the coffee down, took the notebook from his inside pocket. Small, black, worn at the corners from months of being removed and replaced, and placed it on the counter between them. "Version histories," he said. "Meeting notes with attribution records, change logs from the shared project system, document metadata at different points in time." He said it with the same flat register as everything else. "Yours are in there, starting from week 2. She looked at the notebook, but didn't reach for it. "You've been documenting what he does," she said. "What gets done," he corrected gently. "I didn't always know it was specifically him. I knew the pattern." "For how long?" He was quiet for a moment. 8 months. The air conditioning unit above them clicked and hummed. She looked at the notebook, the worn corners, the full pages visible at the edge. 8 months of documentation, sitting in his jacket pocket, carried to every meeting, every check-in, every moment it could have been used. Why didn't you do anything with it? He didn't answer immediately. He picked the notebook up and held it, not opening it, just holding it. She watched something move across his expression. Not guilt, exactly. More like an honest recognition of something uncomfortable. Because I told myself it wasn't my fight, he said finally. That the system would correct eventually. That I would be inserting myself into something that could be misread, misused, used against both of us. He paused. That it was easier to observe than to act on what I was observing. She held his gaze. And now? Now your name is missing from a document you wrote, and the version of that excuse I've been carrying doesn't fit anymore. There was no drama in it. He wasn't confessing. He was reporting. But the honesty was the kind that costs something, and she could see it cost him, and she found that she respected it precisely because he didn't ask her to forgive it. What's in the version history? She asked. He opened the notebook. They stood in that kitchen for 11 minutes. He walked her through 4 documents, timestamps, version changes, original author metadata replaced in 3 of them after submission. One case where her research methodology had appeared in a team brief attributed to consolidated input from the global strategy team. He had written it all down by hand, in small, clean script, cross-referenced with dates. When he was done, she closed the notebook carefully, as if it belonged to both of them now. She was quiet for a moment. She thought about what it meant that he had carried this for 7 months. Through every meeting where the same thing happened. Through every time he had watched and written and said nothing. She thought about how easy it would have been to leave the notebook in a drawer. To tell himself it was a private record. A personal accounting that never needed to become anyone else's reality. That keeping it constituted a kind of witnessing even without action. She understood the logic of that. She had used a version of it herself. This is enough to take somewhere, she said. Not a question. Yes, he said. And you know what going somewhere means for your position here. He looked at her steadily. I've been at this company for 7 years. I've watched this pattern in 3 different forms across 2 different teams. I wrote it down every time, and told myself I was waiting for the right moment. He paused. There was never going to be a right moment. I was waiting for permission I was never going to receive. She held that. What's in the notebook? She said. Can you prove it's what you say it is? That the version changes weren't administrative errors? That the pattern is real? The timestamps speak for themselves, he said. Version histories on corporate systems don't lie. The metadata is logged at the server level. It can be verified by someone outside the team's admin access. He had thought this through. That's why I want this to go to compliance rather than HR. HR wants the problem to disappear quietly. Compliance has a different mandate. She took that in. Then, this could be used. Yes. It puts you at risk, too. I know. You've been at this company for 6 years. 7, he said. She looked at him for a moment. At the steady way he held that. The way he wasn't minimizing the weight of it or inflating it into heroism. I'm not asking you to do anything, she said. I need you to know that. I know, he said. But I'm going to do something with it anyway. He picked up his coffee. When you decide what direction you want to go, I'll be in the same direction. He left the kitchen. She stood there for a moment with the specific feeling of something shifting inside her that had been braced against shifting for 3 months. She went to Seo-jin on a Wednesday afternoon. She kept it precise. The document, the metadata, the version history. She did not use the words stolen or credit. She used discrepancy and attribution error because she had learned which language got considered and which language got the person using. It managed out of the room. She had also, before this meeting, sent herself a copy of the screenshot from the document system and saved it in a personal account outside the company's infrastructure, not as a declaration. as a precaution that felt necessary and sad in equal measure. Seo-jin listened with her reading glasses on, which meant she had decided before the conversation ended how she would respond. When Latifa finished, Seo-jin was quiet for a moment. Then she removed her glasses. "I understand this is frustrating," she said. "It's inaccurate," Latifa said. "The authorship record is factually wrong. In collaborative environments, attribution can become complex. Contributors often build on each other's frameworks. Seo-jinsi." Latifa said it with a level voice and steady eyes. "I wrote that document independently, submitted it under my own file path, and the author field was changed 5 days later by someone with admin access. That isn't a collaborative complexity. That's a specific action." A pause. Seo-jin put her glasses back on. "I hear you," she said. "I would suggest, however, that how you navigate this matters as much as the issue itself. The team is in a sensitive period. The board is watching the expansion project closely. Making formal accusations before the situation is better understood. What would better understanding look like? Getting more context, understanding the team dynamic, being patient." The word patient arrived with a specific texture. Latifa absorbed it. "I'll keep that in mind," she said, with a voice that communicated nothing except the sentence itself. She left the office and walked directly to the emergency stairwell, not because she was breaking down, but because she needed 30 seconds in a place without an audience to think clearly. She sat on step 11, counted to 20, stood up, and went back to her desk. She called HR that afternoon as a preliminary inquiry. The woman she spoke to was pleasant and used the phrase, "We encourage direct resolution at the team level," twice in 4 minutes. When Latifa mentioned the metadata specifically, the woman said she would make a note and that someone would follow up. The follow-up arrived 3 days later, a form email with a link to the company's internal conflict resolution guidelines, which were 12 pages long and prioritized. In their first 3 bullet points, maintaining team cohesion and preserving productive working relationships. The phrase "formal complaint" did not appear until page 9. That night, Dong-hyun sent her a message, just the document title and a question mark. She replied, "Seo-jin said to understand the team dynamic. HR said to resolve it directly." He did not respond immediately. When he did, it was a single line. "There's someone at the compliance level who doesn't report to this floor's chain." He included no further explanation. He didn't need to. She understood what he was saying and what it would mean for both of them if they went there. She didn't respond that night. She looked at the message. She thought about 3 months of adjusted slide colors and softened copy and the shade of blue that looked too aggressive for their style. She thought about Imani's question, "Which fight are you in?" She thought about the first time she had sat on step 11 alone. She fell asleep without having replied. The night had that specific quality that difficult decisions produce. Not restless exactly, but full. Like the mind continuing to run through something after the body has accepted it, needs to stop. She woke up twice. Both times, she looked at the message on her phone, read it again, and went back to sleep without responding. By morning, she didn't need to respond with words. She needed to respond with what she did next. Minwoo made his move on a Friday morning, in a team meeting with 11 people present. Seo-jin had called the meeting to review the Q3 expansion project timeline. Latifa was in the third seat from the left with her laptop open and her pen uncapped, because uncapping the pen was still a habit, even when she had consciously stopped taking it to meetings. She had not consciously stopped today. The timeline review was proceeding normally. Deliverables, dates, dependencies. Then Minwoo cleared his throat in the specific way that signals prepared spontaneity. "I want to take a moment," he said in English. For the room, Latifa noted, since everyone present spoke Korean, to acknowledge how much the global brand project has benefited from the contribution of our international team, particularly the audience segmentation work and the messaging framework that came out of the collaborative process this past month. He smiled with the easy warmth of someone performing sincerity for an audience that would not look closely. This kind of cross-cultural collaboration is exactly what makes this project strong. The room reacted well. Nods. A small sound of agreement from one of the directors. Someone at the end of the table smiled at Latifa, including her, endorsing her, absorbing her into a credit-sharing narrative that erased any distinction between what she had built and what had been built by collective goodwill. Seo-jin did not correct him. Dong-hyun, 2 seats to Latifa's right, was writing in his notebook. Slowly. She could not see what he was writing, but she knew he had heard every word. Latifa smiled. It was the correct smile. Warm, collegial, the smile of someone who receives recognition graciously. It reached her eyes because she trained it to. It lasted the appropriate number of seconds. She gave a small nod of acknowledgement in Minwoo's direction, and it cost more than anything had ever cost. Not because she was weak. She was not weak. But because she understood now, with full clarity, what was happening. He was doing it in front of witnesses, in a language she would be heard in a register that would read as generous rather than appropriative. He had taken her work, attributed it to collective process, and used her visible presence as both the justification and the shield. The room had no reason to question it. She had every reason to, and no mechanism that wouldn't make her the problem. After the meeting, Dong-hyun appeared beside her in the hallway. He didn't say anything. He simply matched her pace for a moment. Then he said, "I've started a separate version of the documentation, every entry dated, including today." She looked at him. "He's going to keep doing this," she said. It wasn't a question. "He'll keep doing this until there's a reason not to. We need to go to compliance." He was quiet for precisely 1 beat. "Yes," he said. "I know. You've known for a while." "Yes." She stopped walking. He stopped too. "I'm not angry at you for waiting," she said, because it was important to say it clearly. "But I need to know. When we go there, you're going all the way." He met her eyes. "All the way." She nodded. They went in separate directions. She went to the bathroom, stood at the sink, ran cold water over her wrists, and looked at her own face in the mirror for long enough to remember who she was before she had learned to hold her breath in this building. If you're already here, you already know this story is the kind that hits where it should. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The next meeting is coming. She went to the stairs that night after everyone left. Not from crisis, from decision. There is a difference, and she had learned by now to feel it. Crisis takes you to the stairs because you can't hold it anywhere else. Decision takes you there because you need a place without interference. She sat on step 11, and she thought clearly. She had taken this job to prove something. Not in the abstract, in the specific. She had wanted to be in a room where the work was real and the stakes were real, and she had wanted to do that work so well that no one would have the language to diminish it. She had believed, in the months before arriving, that if she was rigorous enough and adapted enough and strategic enough, the quality of the work would be sufficient proof against anything the environment might try to impose on her. She understood now what that belief had cost her. Not the faith in the work. The work was still worth doing. But the idea that doing it correctly was armor. That if you were excellent enough, precisely enough, the thing that was coming wouldn't arrive. It had arrived anyway. And more than that, the adaptation itself had become a tool. Every time she softened the language, changed the color of the chart, sat down before she was finished, she had been training the environment to expect her compliance. She had thought she was buying goodwill. She had been teaching the room what it could take without consequence. She pressed her palms flat against the concrete of step 11 and sat with that truth until it stopped feeling like accusation and started feeling like information. The question, from this point, was not whether to act. She had already decided that. The question was what she wanted the outcome to actually be. Not the minimum viable outcome, the real one. Accurate records, formal acknowledgement, a structure that could not pretend, going forward, that what happened had been ambiguous. She could live without a dramatic reversal. she could live without apology. What she could not continue living inside was the version of events where she had been here for 5 months, built strategy that moved the project, and left no proof that any of it had been hers. The door above her opened. She didn't startle this time. Dong-hyun came down 2 steps and sat in the same position as the first time. Notebook in his hand, pen clipped. He had been taking the stairs home. He had not followed her. The stairs were still, as they had always been. A place that belonged to both of them without belonging to either. "I'm thinking about leaving," she said. Not to test him. Not to perform uncertainty. Because it was true, and she had decided it was safe to say true things in this particular location to this particular person. He was quiet. "I could resign with a clean record before this becomes a formal dispute," she said. "Take a reference from Seo Jin while it's still possible. Go back to Atlanta. Rebuild." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "Is that what you want?" "I'm asking whether it's smarter." "I know. But that's not what I asked." She looked at him sideways. He was watching the wall. The same wall he always watched when he was saying something that required attention. Notebook in his hands, unopened. "Do you want to leave because you want to?" he said. "Or because it's easier than staying and being seen by people who spent 3 months trying to make sure you weren't?" It was the wrong question at the right time. She recognized it as such immediately. The kind of question that doesn't offer an answer, just makes the one you were circling around visible. She sat with it. He sat beside it. "Leaving," she said finally, "would look like I wasn't built for this. And everyone who made assumptions about why I was hired would have the confirmation they were quietly already building. That's one reason to stay," he said. "Is it your reason?" A long pause. "No," she said. "My reason is that I built something real here, and I am not leaving it for someone else to wear like it was always theirs." He nodded. Not in relief, in recognition, as if that was the sentence he had been waiting for her to reach. He stood, tucked the notebook back into his jacket, and said, "Then we go to compliance tomorrow morning." She didn't answer immediately. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he agreed. He went back through the door. She stayed for another few minutes, not in crisis, not in doubt. In the specific stillness of someone who has made a decision and is letting it settle into place. Then she stood, smoothed her jacket, and went back up the stairs with her pen capped in her hand. Ni. They had agreed. Thursday morning, the compliance director's office on the 15th floor. His name was Lee Jae-won, and he reported to the company's holding headquarters rather than the Seoul floor's internal hierarchy, which meant he was, structurally, outside the chain that had already demonstrated its preference for quiet. Dong-hyun had done the research. He had formatted the documentation clearly. Dates, document titles, version history comparisons, attribution changes, the timeline of Latifah's submissions against the subsequent appearances of her frameworks under different names. He submitted the report Wednesday evening, after hours. By Thursday morning at 8:47 a.m., Minwoo knew. Latifah didn't know how he knew, whether someone in administrative access had flagged it, whether he had a relationship inside compliance she hadn't mapped, or whether he simply read the room the way he always had, faster than anyone else in the building. What she knew was that he appeared at her desk at 8:52 a.m., with the same easy smile and the same calculated calm, and he sat in the chair across from her without asking whether the chair was available. "I heard you and Dong-hyun put together some documentation," he said. She looked at him. "Where did you hear that?" "It doesn't matter." The smile was still there, but something behind it was running a different calculation. "I want you to think carefully about how this will read from the outside. A foreign hire, 5 months in, making formal accusations against a senior team member. In a company that's very publicly committed to its image right now." She held eye contact and said nothing. "It's going to look like you couldn't adapt," he continued, "like the fit wasn't right, and you're trying to make that the company's fault." His voice was reasonable, almost gentle. "I'm not saying that to be unkind. I'm saying it because I know how these things go, and I don't want you to walk into something that hurts you more than it hurts anyone else." She let the silence sit for a moment after he finished. "I adapted too much," she said. He blinked. "I adjusted the strategy 3 times, she said. "I changed the color of the chart. I spoke less in meetings so I'd be less visible. I didn't raise attribution errors because I needed to be seen as collegial." She paused. "I adapted. And it didn't protect anything. So I'm done using adaptation as a strategy." He was still for a moment. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and said, "This is going to be uncomfortable for everyone." "I know," she said. "Have a good morning." He walked away. She watched him go, then turned back to her screen and sent a single message to Dong-hyun. "I'm ready." The meeting with Lee Jae-won was at 10:00 a.m. She arrived with her laptop, a folder of printed documentation, and the pen, uncapped. Dong-hyun was already there. He had the notebook on the table, physical and present, the way he had said he would carry it. Not digitized, not uploaded, the original pages. His body behind the decision. Lee Jae-won was 52, methodical, and had the quality of attention of someone who had stopped being interested in surfaces a long time ago. He read the documentation in full without comment. He did not, at any point, look at Latifa in the way she had braced for. The evaluating look, the calculating look, the one that measures how much disruption is attached to the person making the complaint. He read the documents the way you read documents when you want to understand what they actually say. Then he asked 4 specific questions, which Latifa and Dong-hyun answered in sequence. When he finished, he said, "This will require a formal review. I'll need 3 to 5 business days before we proceed. You should both avoid discussing this with other team members until then." "Understood," Latifa said. "One more thing," he added, looking between them. "This documentation, how long has this been compiled?" Dong-hyun's hand rested on the notebook. 7 months, he said. Lee Jae-won looked at him for a moment. "Then you understand that your own conduct will be part of this review as well." "Yes," Dong-hyun said. "I understand." There were no dramatic promises, no guarantees. The elevator back down to the 12th floor was quiet. She and Dong-hyun stood in it side by side, not talking, watching the floor numbers change. At 12, the doors opened. They went in separate directions. She sat down at her desk, placed the pen in front of her on the surface, and breathed. Once, fully, not the held-back version. The review took 6 business days. In that time, the floor maintained its surface. People went to meetings. Coffee was made. The handwritten note on the microwave stayed up despite Thursday fish. Min-woo was cordial in the specific way of someone who has decided that composure is a strategy, and Seo-jin was measurably quieter than usual, her glasses coming on and off with less frequency as if she had run out of people worth evaluating. On day 4, Latifa came in to find an email from Lee Jae-won's office. The review had identified sufficient basis for a formal corrective action process. The items to be addressed included incorrect attribution in the document system, procedural irregularities in project credit records, and failure of supervisory oversight to respond to reported concerns. The last line asked all named parties to hold Thursday at 2:00 p.m. for a structured conversation. She read the email twice, then set the laptop aside and sat for a moment with the reality of it. Not triumph. That wasn't what it felt like. It felt more like the specific exhale after you've been holding your breath so long you forgot you were holding it. Dong-hyun sent her a message at 10:14 a.m., Thursday at 2. She replied, "I know." He replied, "How are you?" She looked at the question. It was the first time he had asked it directly, not through the proxy of observations or logistics. She thought about what to say. She typed, "Better than I thought I'd be at this point." His reply came quickly. "Same." The conversation ended there. It didn't need to go further. Thursday, she arrived at 1:45 p.m. She went to her desk, put on her jacket, and picked up the pen. Uncapped, deliberately. She looked at it for a moment. The same pen she'd been carrying since before she arrived in Seoul. the one she held in meetings like a counterweight, the one she'd stopped bringing to the rooms where things happened to her. She held it now with the specific intention of someone who has decided that showing what she's about to create is no longer a liability. Then she walked to the conference room on the 15th floor. The room had 8 people. Lee Jae-won, 2 compliance officers, Seo-jin, Min-woo, Dong-hyun, Latifa, and an HR representative who sat at the far end and looked as though she would rather be anywhere else. Lee Jae-won opened the meeting with a review of the formal findings. He was precise and without editorializing. The attribution changes were documented. The pattern was clear. The supervisory response, or the absence of it, was noted. Min-woo's composure held for approximately 20 minutes. When he spoke to contest one of the documented instances, Lee Jae-won produced the version comparison Dong-hyun had included in the original report. 2 files, 2 timestamps, 1 name changed for the other. Min-woo looked at it, and something in the architecture of his composure recalculated visibly. He did not confess. He said very little. But the room had the documentation in front of it, and the room was no longer the room where things got absorbed without acknowledgement. Seo-jin, when she spoke, said something Latifa hadn't expected. "I was informed of the concern. I recommended internal resolution." A pause. That was insufficient. She said it without apparent emotion, as if reading a procedural finding about herself. It was not an apology, but it was the first time someone in a position of authority had named, in a formal setting, that what happened had happened. And Latifa understood, watching her, that this was what survival looked like from the other direction. Seo-jin had spent 12 years learning to stay. She had stayed, and she had stayed quiet, and at some point those 2 things had become the same strategy. The cost of it was visible now in the way she held herself in this room. Precise, controlled, and very careful not to look at Latifa directly. Latifa did not feel contempt for her. She felt something more complicated than that. A recognition, and a refusal, and a kind of sorrow. She had been on the path toward becoming this. She had turned back just in time. Latifa spoke once. She said, "What I want is accurate attribution going forward, a correction of the affected records, and a formal acknowledgement that the concerns I raised in week 6 were valid." She said it without asking for permission, without softening, without a smile. The pen was in her hand, uncapped. No one interrupted her. The corrections were made in the document system over the following week. Latifa's name was restored to the documents she had written. A formal note was added to Min-woo's performance record. He remained at the company under a structured improvement plan, which was the kind of outcome that is what it is. Not justice in the shape she might have drawn it, but accountability in the shape an institution offers when it's been forced to offer it. Seo-jin received a supervisory review. She completed it and returned to her role, quieter in certain specific ways that Latifa noticed and chose not to spend energy analyzing. The compliance director sent a brief written summary of outcomes to all involved parties. One line of it stayed with Latifa. The concerns raised were substantiated and warranted formal response. She read it 3 times, not for the validation, because she had stopped needing external validation to know what was true. She read it because the sentence existed, in writing, in a file, in the company's record. It had been named. She called Imani on a Saturday afternoon, Seoul time, from a bench near the Han River. The weather had shifted toward something less hostile, the kind of gray that promises spring rather than just withholding it. "You're different," Imani said, before Latifa had finished saying hello. Latifa looked at the river. "I am." "Good different or—" "Just different," Latifa said. "Like I'm sitting differently in my own body." Imani let that land. "I've been thinking about something you said on one of those calls. The one at 3 in the morning." "What?" "You said you didn't know whether you were fighting because it was right, or because you were afraid of what you'd become if you didn't." A pause. "Which was it?" Latifa watched a group of people walking along the riverbank. Unhurried, Saturday pace, carrying coffee. Both, she said. At first. But by the time we walked into that last meeting, it was neither. I wasn't afraid, and I wasn't proving anything. I just knew what was true and said it. She paused. That's the first time I've done that without calculating the cost first. That's the whole arc right there, Imani said. I know. She almost smiled. Took me 5 months. Some people never get there. I know that too. Then Imani asked about Donghyun, which Latifa had been waiting for without admitting she was waiting for it. Have you had an actual conversation with him? One that isn't about documentation or stares? We had coffee last Tuesday. And? He told me his father thinks he should have been an architect. Imani laughed. Warm, full, the kind that carries years of friendship in it. What did you say? I said the buildings would probably be very organized. He laughed. He almost laughed. He smiled with just the left side, which for him is close. Latifa. What? That's not nothing. She didn't answer immediately. She watched a boat pass on the river, steady, unhurried, going somewhere without making a production of it. She thought about Step 11, about arriving in Seoul with a printed contract and a folder of research, and the belief that quality was its own protection. About 6 weeks of strategy rebuilt 3 times. About the shade of blue that looked too aggressive for their style. About the specific sound of an idea being applauded from someone else's mouth, while she sat with composed posture and calibrated expression, and calculated how much it would cost her to say what she knew. She thought about sitting on that step with her back against the wall and her palms on the cold concrete, and the footsteps that had stopped above her, and a full minute of silence that said more than most conversations. About a notebook in an inside jacket pocket, carried for 7 months, and a person who had watched long enough to know when watching was no longer sufficient. She had gone to that stairwell to disappear. She had found instead the first honest thing, and it had led, through everything that followed, to here. What struck her now, sitting by the river, was not that she had won. The word felt wrong, too clean, too resolved for what had actually happened, which was slower and messier and involved more forms and procedural language and careful sentences than any clean narrative would allow. What she felt was something more specific. She had stayed inside her own experience of events without letting the room's version become hers. She had named the truth and carried it forward even when the structure around her bent toward making it unnamed. That had required more from her than any presentation or strategy, brief or adjusted shade of blue, had ever required. That, she thought, was the work. The other work, the decks and the frameworks and the documents that now bore her name correctly, that was the job. What happened in the stairwell and in the kitchen and in Lee Jae-won's office on the 15th floor, that had been something larger. Later that week, walking through the 12th floor hallway, she passed the emergency stairwell door. She didn't slow, didn't feel the pull toward it. The stairs hadn't lost their meaning. She knew what they'd held and what they'd made possible. But she kept walking, past the door, and into the hallway full of people who were doing the work of the day. She did not need to hide. She did not need the wall. She was, as it turned out, built for this. And the room had always been hers. It had simply taken the building too long to catch up. This story didn't end here. Save it, because the next chapter begins where she finally occupies the space that was always hers.